Good afternoon. On behalf of the Illinois Philharmonic Orchestra, the Executive Director, Christina Salerno, who is right here in the audience, welcome to the 16th Annual 2025 Illinois Philharmonic Orchestra Rising Star Showcase. We're delighted to have you here in these beautiful environments at Flossmoor Community Church. We thank them sincerely for the use of these excellent facilities. Every year when I host this, I never cease to be amazed at the level of talent, maturity, musicality that I see in these young artists. And I know that in the not too distant future, we will be able to say, gee, you know, I remember back when they played at the Rising Star Showcase. Those of you who were at the IPO concert in February and saw the feature of Matthew Lippman, Juilliard graduate, Deutsche Grammophon recording artist, know what I'm talking about. That got started with Rising Star. I also have to say, I have the ideal vantage point. I'm sitting right here. I can see and hear these wonderful musicians, and I can glance momentarily out into the audience and see the dropped jaws, the looks of amazement as these young artists perform. My name is Albert Jackson. I'm very happy to serve you as the host today and to say a word or two about each piece as it gets played. We start with Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Anybody familiar with the life of Tchaikovsky is familiar with its, shall we say, oddities. His insecurities, his depression, his odd relationship with his anonymous donor, his anonymous patroness, his reputed as homosexuality, which in 19th century Tsarist Russia was considered to be a heinous crime, his occasional conducting with his left hand so that his right hand could hold onto his head, lest it fall off into the audience during the performance. How much of any of this had to do with his composition and the subsequent complete revision of the variations on a Rococo theme is anybody's guess. But what we do know is that the piece played around the world today is in no small part the work of Wilhelm Fitzhagen, the dedicatee who played the initial performance in 1877. Fitzhagen's complete revision of the piece is kind of reminiscent of what happened with Mozart. Mozart died before his Requiem was completed, and it was left to, they say, Salieri, or probably more exactly Süssmayr, who completed the work. Except in this instance, the work was already completed, and the composer was still very much alive and very much upset. However, given his oddities, neuroses, we'll have to say, he let the revisions stand. Nevertheless, the Rococo variations are clearly Tchaikovsky, beautiful, cool classicism draped in romantic garb. Here to play the theme and 5 variations from the Tchaikovsky Rococo variations is 14-year-old Nathan Freeland, accompanied by Lisa Christina. What did I tell you? 19th century violinist, flugelhorn player, and composer Jean-Baptiste Accolé lived 1833 to 1900, which is to say, right in the height of the Romantic period. He studied violin at the Royal Conservatory in Brussels, played flugelhorn in a military attachment there, and played first violin in a couple of the theaters in Bruges and Namur. At the age of 27, he was appointed to the faculty of the Conservatory of Bruges, where he stayed 40 years until his death in 1900. Most of his works are, of course, for violin, generally character pieces, concertos, concertinos, and probably his best known piece is the piece which you are about to hear now, his concerto in A minor, originally for violin and orchestra, here for violin and piano. The piece has been played by everybody. It's been recorded by everybody, including, of course, Isaac Perlman, who says of it, one of the most enduring of all tutorial violin concertos, still regularly studied today. It's a beautiful piece, spontaneous. It characterizes one of the great juxtapositions of music in that very expressive music can derive without the necessity for ostentatious display and virtuosity. Here to play the Accolé Concerto in A minor is 12-year-old Veronica Tarmac. the New York Times bestseller, Running with Scissors by Augustin Burroughs. And of course, we have all heard the admonition that running with scissors is not only very dangerous, but the depth of foolhardiness. Running with French horn, however, is not dangerous in the least, and is in fact delightful and beautiful. 17-year-old Aaron Alexander was with us last year and returns to us again this year with a piece of his own composition, Running with French Horn, which falls into a category known as third stream music. That's a term that was coined by Gunther Schuller, the director of the New England Conservatory, some number of years ago. And we may know it as crossover music, a combination or a juxtaposition of classical and jazz, or classical and popular, or two other types of music. So when we hear, say, virtuoso violinist Hilary Hahn jamming with mandolin player Chris Thiele, or we hear Bobby McFerrin improvising on a theme of Mozart with jazz pianist Chick Corea, we're hearing third string music. So here to play Running with French Horn is 17-year-old Aaron Alexander. Oh, of course. You know, the Dune soundtrack. Great. All right. At this point, I have to do what I was actually going to do at the end of the program, and that is invite you to the next IPO concert, May the 17th, 7:30 p.m. It's at Rosinga Chapel on the campus of Trinity Christian College, and it includes a world premiere by the IPO, Composer in Residence. When I think of young composers, that's the 17th of May. Also on that program is a tremendous organ concerto by Francis Poulenc, which is a great segue into the next performer, which is Anthony Adduci, who's going to play the Prelude, Fugue, and Variations, Opus 18 of, I will give you his full name, of César Auguste Jean-Guillaume Hubert Frank. When one reads his biography, one could think that one is reading the biography of Mozart. Frank was born in Liège, Belgium, 1822, the son of a very eager and very enterprising father, who, seeing his son's prodigious talent, enrolled him as well as his younger sibling, Wolfie and Nana Mozart, into the conservatory at age 12, had him on the road by age 13, private lessons in Paris, and even became a French citizen so as to enroll César Franck in the Paris Conservatory by age 15. Does the term helicopter parent mean? Of course, this kind of aggressive behavior is bound to have repercussions at home, and indeed, by the time he was 22, César Franck had completely broken with his father, remained in Paris when the father was sort of ousted and returned to Belgium. His prodigious talent and his very deep Roman Catholic faith landed him a job almost immediately in a church, and then another, until finally at the age of 37, he was appointed the organist at the newly consecrated Saint Clotilde Church, and began to play the organs of Auguste Cavaillé-Coll, who was to organs what Stradivarius was to violins. César Franck was known, of course, as a force at the organ, not only in playing prepared pieces, but in improvising. And his improvisations after Mass became a major public event. Can you imagine people coming to church more to hear the music than the sermon? I won't go there. Some of his improvisations he wrote down, including 6 pieces for grand organ, Opus 18, one movement of which is the Prelude, Fugue, and Variation, which will now be played for us by Anthony Adduci, who at the age of 14 is already a colleague of the American Guild of Organists and assists at the organs both of Sacred Heart Church in Lombard and St. Daniel the Prophet in Wheaton. The Prelude, Fugue, and Variation, Opus 18 by César Franck, played by Anthony Adduci. Samuel Pratt, the youngest of 13 children, maybe he was lucky number 13, was born 20th of March, 1925 in El Paso, Texas. The family moved shortly thereafter to Freeland, Utah, where Sam was able to attend high school. He studied flute and piano and went on to Brigham Young University in Provo to get a degree, not in music, but rather in psychology, and then a master's in psychology, and then he moved to LA. I think the master's in psychology probably stood him in good stead. He worked in LA at the Lion and Healy Harp Company. He was there for quite some number of years, but then moved here to Chicago, where he was the manager of the iconic Lion and Healy showroom right up here on Ogden Avenue. He also was a designer of harps and designed a smaller harp called the Troubadour harp for younger players. He stayed here a long time. He was divorced. He was remarried. He moved to New York City, and he was concertizing not as a harpist, but as a flute player with Metropolitan Opera soprano Roberta Peters, while he was still at Lion and Healy in New York. As if he had nothing else to do, he was also a composer. And his piece, The Little Fountain, probably one of his best known pieces, is still a standard for talented young harpists today, like 16-year-old Jaciel Austin, who will now play The Little Fountain by Samuel Pratt. interests me, wrote Ernst Bloch, is the Jewish soul, the enigmatic, ardent, turbulent soul that I feel vibrating throughout the Bible. It is all this that I endeavor to hear in myself and to transcribe into my music. The suite for violin and piano of Al Shem by Ernst Bloch was written in 1923 while he was the director of the Cleveland Institute of Music. The title refers to the founder of Hasidic Judaism, Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, also known as the Baal Shem Tov, loosely translated the miracle worker or the doer of good deeds. He was a charismatic visionary along about the time of Bach, and like Bach, and I would dare say like many of us here, I'll quote, believed in a spiritual connection and service to God through music. The middle movement of that suite, Nigun, simply means melody, and it is one of Bloch's most famous pieces for violin and piano. It's been in the repertoire ever since it was composed and remains so today. According to Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism on which the Hasidic religious fervor is based states that, as I said before, I mentioned melody. A melody can elevate a person into a transcendent level, reaching spheres of hidden knowledge. Well, I just heard it in the César Franck. You heard it in something from Bach, or Mozart, or Haydn, or Ernst Bloch. Here, to lift us to transcendence, is the music of Ernst Bloch, played by 16-year-old Neel Patel, accompanied by Dr. Lisa Christina. participating in a cakewalk. It was a fundraiser for my grade school when I was in 4th, 5th, or 6th grade about 150 years ago. A cakewalk is a kind of dance, if you will. I remember rather stodgy music being played while participants sort of trudged around in a circle that was marked with squares with numbers on them. And you know how it goes. If the music stops, you stop, and then somebody calls out a number, and if you're standing on the number, you win a plate of cookies or a cake or something really boring like that. Swipesy by Scott Joplin is a cakewalk, but not like the cakewalks I knew. Cakewalk, the original, comes from the mid-19th century among African Americans, both before and after the Civil War. It was indeed a circle dance, a pair dance that incorporated rather exaggerated formal movements. It is said as a rather subtle mockery of white slaveholders. Swipesy was written latter 1890s. It was copyrighted 1900 by Scott Joplin and his young student, his composition student, Arthur Marshall, while Joplin was living with the Marshalls at the time. Popular legend has it that the name Swipesy came from a photograph which was to appear on the cover of the music, showing a little African-American boy with a rather mischievous smile, and one of the publishers said it looked like he had just swiped a cookie from the cookie jar. Chicago can also claim connection to Scott Joplin because it was his playing in the World's Fair, 1893 in Chicago, that got ragtime dancing started as a craze in the last decade of the 19th, early decade of the 20th century going. By Joplin's death in 1917, ragtime was largely at an end, but had a sudden and dramatic resurgence in the 1970s when it was used as the background music for The Sting, Academy Award winner Robert Redford. And from then on, it has become sort of a standard, a niche piece in the literature. We hear now the cakewalk Swipesy, performed for us today by 14-year-old Anderson Pries. Immediately behind you where you can congratulate the players individually and